Good morning. This generation for legacy car makers from the United States and Europe and Japan is likely the last. For most of this century, cars will be built in China or in countries where China set up factories that are plugged into China's supply chains. These are the monthly costs of buying a new car in the United States. The report comes from the Federal Reserve and it analyzes how interest rate cuts might help people buy cars. In the second quarter of 2024, the cost to own a new car in the United States hit a record of $1,100 per month. That includes principal and interest payments, gas, and insurance. It does not include maintenance or taxes. This is a shocking number and explains why cars are just unaffordable to most of the country now. 73% of Americans say they're delaying the purchase of a new car. More than half say they're going to work a second job or work longer hours to buy their next car. The Fed crunched the numbers and learned that cutting interest rates doesn't make much difference. Cutting rates by 50 bips cuts the cost by $9. There's some good news on gas prices. If they stay low, there's another $14 in monthly fuel savings. But nobody thinks car insurance premiums will go down. And car maintenance and repairs aren't even included in the $1,100 monthly number. 73% of Americans look at new car prices and think they're way too high. And if they seem crazy even to us, how do they look from the rest of the world where they can buy a new Chinese car for less than $10,000? The world is breaking apart into two blocks, North America and Western Europe, where legacy car makers have erected high tariffs to keep Chinese cars out. And that means they can focus on building only the highest profit vehicles. That's not going to work for much longer, though, because car markets in the United States and Western Europe aren't big enough to support all those old brands. So the market is collapsing on itself. Companies are shutting down or merging or reorganizing to stay alive, but they're just trying to buy time. If most Americans say they need to work overtime hours to buy a car, politicians will eventually be listening to those people instead of to Detroit. Up to now, lawmakers have put up trade barriers to affordable cars, and that's probably going to continue for a while under the new U.S. administration. But in the American market, the problem is that pickup trucks and SUVs are by far the most profitable vehicles. The United States is a large, high-margin market. Car makers are making lots of money at over $50,000 per vehicle, and 28% of the cars sold in the United States are over $60,000. That's the good news for the companies that build cars. The bad news is that the high-price markets are mature markets. A mature market is one that isn't growing. This analyst goes back 10 years, company by company. In North America, Western Europe, and Japan, the car industry is shrinking. Vehicle sales are lower than they were 10 years ago, and revenues at the 6 biggest manufacturers are either treading water or heading lower. This is contrary to what experts thought would happen. Back in 2010, they forecast that car sales in the U.S. would be 20 million a year in the U.S. by 2020, but that didn't happen. General Motors sales has fallen the most. In 2023, GM sold nearly 4 million fewer cars compared to 2013. And GM was even helped by their minority interest in Wuling Auto, which sold 1 million cars here in China. Ford is selling 30% fewer vehicles compared to 10 years ago. They're making more money, though, but not adjusted for inflation. The only good news is from Toyota, who gained slightly, about 9% or so over the past decade. Volkswagen is down by 900,000 units. Hyundai down 600,000. But Hyundai is making more money because they're making more expensive cars. Honda sales are off 11%. In our mature markets, then, the legacy car brands are selling fewer cars, but they've been holding on by selling much more expensive ones. But now China, supply chains, and household economics are forcing a reckoning everywhere. There are a lot of headlines back home about Chinese overcapacity, how China builds factories that could oversupply markets. China does not believe they're doing that. They're building factories that will create new markets in addition to competing in ours. China has built staggering capacity in car manufacturing, enough to build 50 million cars a year. That's twice what China needs and enough for half the global market. What China has done in the car industry is the same as what they've done in 100 others. They surveyed the global car market and asked, what will be the global market demand for affordable cars? Not pickup trucks at $50,000, but everything else. What's the market, and what will the market be if our brands can make money at lower price points than anyone else? At the same time, they develop the supply chains for that industry, and they build the productive capacity at the factories. China also made big bets that electric vehicles would be the most affordable and also the most preferred by global car buyers. China invested heavily in electric vehicle supply chains and technologies. They started here in the Chinese market, which is now the world's largest. China now dominates the sales of EVs across the whole world and now is exporting them by the millions. Last year, China passed Japan and is now the world's biggest car exporter. A particular feature of electric vehicles is that the car itself becomes a commodity. They're like electronic devices, and those are always getting faster over time, getting better over time, and getting less expensive over time. All of this presents an existential challenge to our own car-making companies. Electric cars are the only ones that can be built affordably and sold profitably at under $20,000. But China builds all of those. So the U.S. industry is at near record excess capacity, running under 75% in 18 quarters of the last 19. The United States, Europe, and Japan simply cannot build affordable cars in any markets, and that means that China will have the entire world outside the highest tariff areas where lawmakers specifically exclude the Chinese brands. China is playing a different game. They don't care about the tariffs in our own countries because they can just take the whole rest of the world for now. The United States, Western Europe, and Japan are mature markets. Unit sales growth is negative, but Southeast Asia is a growth market and it's booming. South America and Central America are booming markets. Africa is. East Europe is. When our top car industry analysts sat down 10 years ago to plan industrial capacity for the U.S. car market, they forecast the need for 20 million new cars a year by 2020. And they missed, and they built a lot of capacity they didn't need. When Chinese car industry analysts sat down 10 years ago to build capacity for the Chinese car market, they planned for it to be the biggest market in the world. But they also asked themselves, if we can get the price down to under half, where GM and Ford and VW and Toyota are selling their cars for, what will the markets be then? What will the global demand be for cars at $15,000? And then they built capacity for all that. It's the same strategy every single industry: electronics, shipbuilding, solar panels, now cars, next jet planes. Eventually, Chinese supply chains and manufacturing just overwhelm producers everywhere else, and the tariffs and import bans just crumble away. It's now 3/4 of Americans who can't afford a car. Eventually, our politicians will have to start listening to them. This is Shaman in Fujian. Be good.